You can always, if you need to go out or whatever. So, my first quiz question for tonight. If Jesus came to your door, and hypothetically, you know that it's really Jesus, and you know that he is God, and he says to you, you let him in, and he says to you, sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, and come follow me. Would you go with him, or would you argue with him? So that should be an interesting discussion. So the highlights are that you have no doubt he's God and he's Jesus. So, and theoretically, this is something that Jesus very well may have even asked us in one of the scriptures, right? Yes.
You say, would you go with him, or
Would you argue with him? Want to ask, questions? In other words, be an American, right? You think of it, Americans think for themselves, so it's kind of an odd situation, right? But this is exactly the kind of situation that I think Socrates puts Euthyphro in with that question. Because what he's doing is putting into question anything that the priesthood of whatever sort says that this is what God wants. And if you think about it, well, that's one of the things that traditionally Christians have been faced with, that Jesus wants you to sell everything you have, give the money to the poor, then come follow him. In fact, for almost 2,000 years, not quite, but close, people have been doing that. They join what are referred to as the religious orders, right? And take the vow of poverty and so on, right? And basically are going to try to give up everything and just live the way Jesus wanted them to, right? Right? That's priesthood, the various orders, like the orders of St. Augustine, the order of St. Ignatius Loyola, the Jesuits, right? Jesuits, order of Jesus, basically, right? You get the idea, right? So that's a real thing in the scripture, that a lot of people feel like what Jesus wants is for us to live a life without enjoying material things. Does that make sense? A lot of the monks famously starved themselves, whipped themselves. They even make fun of that in the Da Vinci Code with the Silas, if you're familiar with him, as the one that goes out and kills somebody, then comes back and whips himself, to punish himself, etc. But on the other hand, I saw the cell of Father Sierra in California, one of the missions, where Father Sierra set up the missions in California. And in that cell, they had his whip sitting on his shelf. So that's kind of interesting. If you ever get to visit. On the other hand, as Americans, we pride ourselves on our free choice, on our critical thinking, and we might want to argue with Jesus about whether or not that's, what's the idea? If, for one thing, if everybody gave up everything and, sold it and gave the money to the poor, for one thing, I would already be one of the poor, because I gave up everything, so now I'm poor myself. So that doesn't really work, right? Right? You get the idea? There could be all sorts of conflicts. You might also ask, what's the plan? Is it going to be fish and chips? The rest of... Sorry, that's a British thing. I don't know. I'm curious what you think about that. But I think that kind of controversy is what actually Socrates is doing to Euthyphro. Even today, I think a lot of people would feel that's a politically incorrect question. You shouldn't actually. I wonder, should I even ask that kind of question in class? I expect you to, because on the one hand, I would think, depending on your association, if you're a member of a Christian community, you might feel like, well, if Jesus actually came to my house, I know it's him, and he asked me to give everything up and go and follow him, of course I would have to go. On the other hand, economically, that doesn't work. Certainly not for everyone, unless, of course, there are miracles involved, in which case, then what, right? So I think it's an interesting question, and highlights just how dangerous Socrates' question in the Euthyphro is. And of course, so he's punished for this, yes?
Well, and so I think of it as like what I brought up last time, whether or not Socrates is literal or hypothetical, in the same context that Jesus in the Bible is literal or hypothetical, right? So in your theory or in your hypothetical situation, Jesus comes to your door and chooses you to give up and follow him, versus hypothetical in the Bible where it's metaphor, allegory of like, give up in your personal life that which you would cherish over God and replace that with a devotion to God. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
there's both a literal and a hypothetical with two different answers. Because of course, if everyone were to give up, then it's a...
And there's a lot of Christian organizations that literally feel that by becoming Christian and tithing and things of that sort, you'll actually receive 7 times more, or lots more. In other words, that's how you'll become rich, is by doing this, right? That seems pretty, I mean, it doesn't fit the tradition at all, as we shall see. The sketch that Steve Martin does is actually from the Phaedo. So this would be after the Crito, where he refuses to leave. The Phaedo would be the death scene. And it is really an important dialogue, because Socrates, in the dialogue, does not worry so much about dying. He is old, although not much older than me, actually, at the time. Roughly about 70, right? But what he ends up arguing is that the important part of him is the soul, not the body. And they're going to kill the body, and the soul is going to be released from the prison house of the soul. The body is the prison house of the soul. And once they kill the body, the soul will be released and go to basically heaven, where he expects to meet other great Greek philosophers and have discussions with them. So, that's kind of intriguing, right? And his argument is that the soul is immortal. And the reason he argues for this is because he says the soul has no parts. So if you're killing something or putting something together, what you do is you take the parts, put them together, and it's now a functioning whatever, right? If you destroy it, you break it apart. You take the parts apart. Right? But he argues that the soul has no parts. So it hasn't been put together, nor can it be taken apart. So the soul is eternal. And there's, of course, all kinds of interesting things going on here. One is this doesn't really seem like Socrates. It seems like it's Plato. The other thing is that this seems to have come from the East because it's similar to the Buddhist idea. By the way, something else interesting to bring up here is that this all occurs in what's called the Axial Age. You ever heard of that? Axial Age? So when we think of the Axial Age, there are three main places that have significant advancement. The one is the Greeks, Socrates, Plato, a whole bunch, really. The other is the Buddha, who is basically revolting in the same way that Socrates is against the Hindu religions and all the thousands of gods that they have. And it's a little bit harder to see, but Master Kung, or Confucius, in China, who doesn't really create exactly the same kind of thinking, but does create a pattern of political philosophy that is very different than the typical religions that were there before, right? So, in a sense, all three of these, which are roughly at about the same time, and not necessarily influencing one another, although who knows, but they're all at a point where the civilization that was there has gotten complex enough that the priesthood classes are being questioned by someone who's examining the religions. So you've got Socrates and Plato that are basically being critical then of the religions of altars, sacrifices, various kinds of communities. The interesting thing about the Greeks are that the religions are basically local. So one of the reasons they have so many different gods is because each locality had their own specific local deities. And then as the communities became kind of united with one another and became more like Greece, right, you end up with all of these gods being respected very much the way we would respect different communities for thinking different ways, etc. Seems the same thing happens in India, although with India, of course, the Hindu religions are all still there. I don't know that you would really expect to find any of the ancient cults in Greece. I mean, that's pretty much been taken over, of course, by Christianity primarily, right? But that's kind of interesting. So the Axial Age, you could have fun with that. But wherever the idea of the soul came from, whether it was Plato's or if he learned it from Zoroastrianism, that could be. There's another religion, the religion of Zoroaster, which is kind of interesting. There's lots of stuff about Zoroaster. Have you ever heard of Zoroaster before? Zoroastrianism. It's an ancient religion. So who knows? But the argument is that the soul has no parts, and so therefore can't be destroyed. And that's the most important part of us. So if we think about Plato and his conception of ideas, and what are they? Plato concludes, basically, during the middle period, that the ideas are what really structure the universe, the cosmos, I should say. Right? Cosmos is Greek. Universe is Latin. But cosmos is structured, Plato thinks, by the ideas. And we do have a problem in knowing the ideas. The reason Socrates can't quite find out exactly what the true definition of an idea is, instead he finds all these examples of them, right? But you never quite reconcile all these examples and end up with a clear sense of what the idea really is. Like love, for example, or justice, or truth, or friendship, right? All of those that Steve Martin is bringing up, of course, in the sketch, right? Instead, we're limited to just specific examples of them, and we can't quite get the entire concept clearly. Plato argues that the reason for that is because in order to be one with the ideas and know them fully, our soul has to be free from the body so that it's once again, just like the ideas, universal and not held down by this physical body. So we clearly get the sense that material is corrupting, right? And constantly changing, right? And as a result, the true, the good, is unchanging, universal, right? Never ends, never is changed, it's always perfect, right? Anything to do with material, on the other hand, is constantly in flux. So one of the things that this deals with is the Greek question of how do you deal with the one and the many, right? Because what we have in flux and constantly in motion is the material world, whereas the universal ideas are unchanging, perfect. And mathematics is one of the best ways of thinking about this. For example, the triangle. You think of a triangle, you actually can have multiple types of triangles, right angles, isosceles, triangles, etc. But triangularity itself, any figure that has three angles, right, is the definition of triangularity, right? And mathematics is, in this sense, the best knowledge. So we end up with analogy is a Greek word. A-N-A is equivalent to the Latin R-E. Right? And L-O-G comes from logos, or order, right? So it's the same order twice. Right? This is like that. Same order twice. So there's lots of different ways of drawing it. You could draw it straight across this way, or I've also seen it, in fact, I'll do it this way. So there's different kinds of knowledge, awareness. So I can have a dream, for example, or I can have a hallucination. I'll just do hallucination. But we don't trust those. We're definitely aware of them. I had a dream last night that someday all God's people will walk hand in hand, you know, etc. I'm trying to remember Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, but it's not good. But you get the idea. You know, we have dreams and things. That's like the shadiest awareness you have. Right? And then we have seeing things, experiencing physical things, and so on. And you might feel like, well, this is really terra firma, right? You know, this is something I can be really certain about. But actually, for the Greeks, it's not, because anything to do with matter is going through kind of transition, right? This didn't used to exist. It was made in a factory from materials that were obviously shaped different. Someday someone's going to get mad at somebody and throw this table at somebody and break it. No, sorry, that's something I just read today. And then it'll be trashed, right? You know, so it won't last. Earthquake, maybe, you know, in the next 5 minutes. We'll knock it down, break it up, you know, we'll hide under it, and, you know, be okay until the blood and guts, and, you know. Shouldn't joke about that. This is really, we're on the rim of fire. Yeah. So as far as the Greeks are concerned, material things are actually in transition. Remember Heraclitus, you can't step in the same river twice. So it's not absolutely certain. And in fact, I could be dreaming that I'm seeing it. I know I'm really seeing it, and it's not a dream. So the visible world is in transition. Then, over here, we have math. 1 + 1 = 2. Do any of you have any doubt whatsoever about adding 1 + 1 and getting 2? You don't. It's absolutely certain. Right? Mathematics is something that we can be certain about. So this is a different kind of knowledge, and notice it's invisible. Then Plato goes on to hypothesize about the ideas. The ideas are also in that invisible world, abstraction. They're not real in the physical sense, they're real in the eternal sense. Triangles, triangularity will always be the case. When we think, you know, before there were humans, there was red. And we've come to define red. So it's kind of interesting, is the Iliad only has white, black, and red. So the scholars argued over, did the Greeks not even recognize other colors? One of the funny things, for example, is they refer to the wine dark sea as if it was red, which of course the ocean is greenish or bluish, right? It's not red. The question a lot of scholars asked was, did the Greeks not have the same kind of color perception that we do today? And this argument took place after Darwin, so they were arguing if our color perception has evolved, etc. Of course, we're never going to find out, right? You know, it's very frustrating, to a lot of people. But when you go and do like a search for colors, they clearly didn't have the same colors. But by the way, we can actually point out that color perception is cultural, not universal. And we've got would you like to see a TED Talk? It's much more entertaining than me. I'll turn this off, because otherwise I get in trouble for plagiarizing.